this is your host, Julia Napini. I am a clinical and forensic social worker who owns a counseling practice and a consulting business. In this show, we discuss the challenges of being successful in business while maintaining your integrity and staying true to yourself. Join me while I interview other professionals and share insights from life and experience. Let's talk about RingRx, our latest sponsor. RingRx is a high-quality, HIPAA-compliant telephone, text, and fax communications platform. They provide seamless, cost-effective communications for behavioral therapists, medical practices, hospitals, and other healthcare providers. RingRx is designed for modern healthcare environments. They offer customizable features like a phone app, automated patient outreach, voicemail, after-hours call routing, and top-quality desk phones. Try RingRx for free today at ringrx.com. And if you sign up using the code CLIMB, you'll get 15% off your monthly bill forever. Conditions apply. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Compassionate Climb podcast. This is, I think, the third time that we have had two guests at one time on the show. It's going to be a wild ride, but so worthwhile. So we have Katie and Shaelene with us today, and our focus is going to be for all of you out there who are either new group practice owners, you are ready to pull your hair out because you don't have the systems that you need to be successful, or maybe you're considering group practice and get a little window into the world of the reality, what it's really like, and what you can put in place to make it successful, sustainable, and really continue to enjoy it in the long haul. So thank you both so much for being here.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So you wrote a beautiful little write-up, and I don't typically read it, but I'm going to. So you are both the co-founders of Stabilize and Scale, where you help group practice owners make data-driven, value-aligned decisions. Together, you have supported over 66 and seven-figure practices in building sustainable systems, leading with clarity, and scaling without burnout. Beautifully written. Well done. Props to both of you for that. So share with the audience how all of this came to be with the two of you.
Yeah, so we met on Facebook, which is interesting. I also met my husband on Facebook, so I'm doing something right. We're both DBT practice owners, and we just started chatting in Messenger about various things related to supporting each other in our practices, in our lives, being a business owner through the pandemic, and eventually that conversation shifted to text, shifted to going out to eat. I'll let you pick up from there, Shaelene.
Yeah, I think it was just like a lot of, I think at the time we were kind of like battle buddies in it. Like, what are you doing with this? How are you handling these things coming up? And that lunch back in whatever we just said, January 2021, we were talking about the idea that's now Stabilize and Scale, which was basically coming out of, you know, what if we took all of the things that we learned and tried to put them together for other group practice owners so they don't have to learn on the fly as much, and hopefully we can prevent some people from some harder times with our course. So that's what we set out to do. And at the time we weren't sure if anybody would sign up for it. And now we have this really beautiful, inspiring community. And it's just been really awesome. So yeah.
So I can speak to that community firsthand, just coming back from your Visionary Mastery Summit and being in that room, the energy, the connections that I made with people, everybody that was at my table as we're all mingling, we're on the boat. You bring together an incredible group of people.
You know what? It's really cool. And Shaelene and I just got a message from one of our members a couple days ago, just sharing about a revenue win. And the gist of the message was like, I've never had a place where I could celebrate these kinds of wins, where we could lift other women up, that we could really, you know, be our authentic selves and celebrate our successes and have a community that wants that and roots for us. And it's cool to see. I think it surprises us every time, or at least, you know, the novelty doesn't wear off, that we're super grateful that what we intended to create actually came to fruition, and we keep attracting members who just reinforce that same kind of community.
And it was kind of, I think too, for us, we talked about, at least in our first run of Stabilize and Scale, we had a really great group together. And then like through posting about what we were doing, you know, sharing what we were learning and people seeing that community, other people were like, how can we get in on this? And so our first year we ran 3 events, like, and we will never do that again. We run 1 event a year now. But the thing that made it really easy to stay in that kind of like cycle were really the people.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an unexpected, really awesome gain. And our people, like those cohorts, some of them are just still so close. Like, it's really cool to see them working on businesses together and planning retreats together and those kinds of things. So the community that has come out of it has been like the best part.
The best part, for sure.
And 10 out of 10 for that event. So I'm a little late to the party, but for any of you who are not a part of that, location, the people, the speakers, you know, the all coming together, like having kind of something fun for all of us to do, and exactly what you just described. There are not a lot of places where I'm surrounded by people that get it. And I attend a lot of events, especially lately. And a lot of them are very clinically focused, which is fine. A lot of them are very business focused, but they tend to be a lot of either solo practitioners or those that don't necessarily have a group that is the size of ours that can really relate to a lot of the challenges that come about when you grow beyond a small group practice. So well done. Really enjoyed it. So before we get into the things that I think all of us are interested in knowing, I would love to hear, because we all can see you being successful, managing your teams, you're both in the consulting space and the podcasting space and doing all of the things. And it's so easy to see all of that and maybe have some degree of envy. And it looks like you have it all together and it's very well managed. Can you share a little bit behind the scenes before you got to this point? What contributed to creating what you did and all that you're sharing to help people in the group practice space now?
I'm laughing at the behind the scenes. Like, I'm like, oh, I don't know what that reel would show or look like. Yeah, I mean, and I think like before, I mean, for myself, I remember being in the planning stages of opening a group practice, getting ready to work. I think I was working at another group practice at the time, getting ready to go to work, and I would be listening to Maureen Warbach's podcast. And so I feel like I have had that. Like, I've seen other people and be like, that's where I want to be. That's what I want to do. And I think that, I mean, hopefully that can be channeled in a really good way to be like, oh, look at these people. How can I get around these people more and learn more from these people? Because that really has been a part of, I think, like for my own individual success, that's a part of it. It's like meeting people, networking, connecting, you know, brainstorming, like all of these other things, but with people who are doing the things that you want to be doing. But aside from that, I just think like you have this idea when you're starting out of what your business is going to look like. And for a lot of people, I know that for a lot of people that we've worked with, but for even just myself, you go into this, you know, I'm going to open a group practice and I'm going to change everything. Like, you're really starry-eyed and you're going to be the best place to work, and you're going to right all the wrongs that have happened to you in community mental health, and you're going to make sure your team feels appreciated and all these things. And it's not like those things don't happen, but I think there's a lot of really hard realities that you realize when you're on the other side of being a business owner, of like, oh, wow, it's actually really expensive to give everyone all these benefits. No wonder I didn't get them before. And those mistakes, when you're the person who's in charge of everything, now feels a whole lot different than when you just make a mistake at your job, because now you take everything personally. And so I think like earlier behind the scenes, there was a lot more stress and like heartache at times about all of the intricacies you don't really think of before, when you're in that like starry-eyed place in opening your group practice.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I'm reflecting as you're talking, Shaelene, because I think we still navigate in the same ways for us, but different ways altogether, because I know I'm part of a group of people that I'd call like reluctant group practice owners. I never wanted to be a group practice owner. So I didn't have that initial vision of like, these people are doing it and I want this too. I was really successful in my solo practice, and I work with teens, high-risk teens, and I do DBT. There was no one else in my community doing that. So for me, it was, I have more referrals than I can handle, but I don't feel good about referring them to the generalist down the street that's not going to support them. So it was almost like a fine, I'll do it. No one else is doing it, so I have to do it because the clients that need this matter to me. So I started building a team, some of them coming from the partial hospital that I came from. And we were really scrappy in the beginning where everyone was working together. We were really excited about what we were offering. And it almost felt like we were building something from the ground up. And there was this vibe of camaraderie that it really felt like we were building together. But the turning point for me is we grew really quickly. And so every single year I was new building, doubling size of our team. And it got to the point where the business was really successful. And so the people that I was bringing in weren't seeing this scrappy group practice owner sitting on the floor doing interviews saying like, we're figuring this out together. We were a real deal business. And so everybody that was coming in was expecting the benefits, the salary, the systems that are
what's the policy? Yeah.
Right. And I didn't have those things because we were all in this together. So there was this turning point, this shift where I realized I had to step into leadership in a new way that was super uncomfortable for me. I remember having a conversation with Shaelene where she said something like, what's the expectation? And I said something like, well, I want them to do this. And her challenge to me was like, we have to directly say that to them, which was like not something I was felt capable of at that point. So there was a huge growth edge interpersonally for me to be able to get to this point where I am.
Yes. So if we are assuming that those listening, maybe from this podcast or from other resources out there, are very clear that group practice is in their future. They're very intentional about it. And it's not just this natural progression. This is their goal. So before we get into kind of big picture, what are the biggest things that you would do differently or that you're encouraging people to do right out the gate? And I'm sure there are many, but the biggest ones that are so helpful for people to be considering in the early stages so that they're not course correcting later.
For me, it would be having my systems documented and having that clear expectation from the start. And I do think that the systems would evolve over time, as they should with your team if it grows. But holding those clear expectations, this is what it looks like, this is the caseload number, this is what I expect. And to do that, you need to know your numbers, you need to know what's viable for you. But having to go backwards and put expectations, accountabilities, and systems in place created a surge of turnover on my team that was really painful. And a lot of us that have been through this process have experienced that. So I think the more you can set in place from the start, the more clear you are with the people you bring in so they know what they're signing on to.
Yes.
Yeah, I would sign off on that. And I would add, looking back at my own experience, like you're not going to know everything. And I think like there is this balance between knowing everything before you get started and never starting, as opposed to like getting things done, even if they aren't perfect, and trying to find where the middle ground is behind that. But I think in addition to those things, I would fire people sooner when I felt that they had to go, especially people who I hired because it wasn't my area of expertise, financial website, like those kinds of things. And me just kind of feeling like, well, I don't really know because I'm not the expert in this, as opposed to trusting, no, I think like if I'm asking these questions enough, that's probably enough, and just firing people sooner. That feels like so harsh. But when you first ask the question, when you're like, what would you, I'd be like, I might tell people I don't recommend. I just don't, it's not the same. It's just not, I do think it's worth saying that opening a group practice now versus in 2018, it's just a different landscape. And I think there are a lot of questions you have to ask yourself that, for me looking back, I do think they were still all yeses then, but I would have taken a lot more pause. Like even just what Katie was talking about before, and the difference between running a business and figuring out how to do that versus knowing how to lead people. That's a really nuanced difference that makes like a radical shift for how your life goes as a business owner when you don't have those qualities and when you don't have a team that can like do that for themselves. So yeah.
I think you have to really want to lead people if you want a group practice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And would you both also agree that, I mean, it all starts with us? I mean, if we're not obviously doing some of that work and managing some of our own emotions before we go into those interactions with our team. And I mean, that's something we know as therapists, but it is totally different when you have multiple people emailing, messaging, knocking on your door, you know, if depending on where you're at in terms of your own like self-care and well-being journey, how prepared you are to have those conversations, them getting different versions of you. What was the most helpful for you both to become the types of leaders that you are now?
So I really think that your business is a mirror for your inner landscape. So if you're all riled up inside, that's going to be reflected in the business that you lead. There's a couple things that really helped me. One was working on my own stuff, my family of origin stuff, and just my, what I would call like my shame. I think shame was riding shotgun a lot of the time, and it prevented me from being able to step into leadership in a way that I wanted to. But once I was able to do it, what really helped me was knowing what my vision was, being clear on what I could offer. And the thing I find myself saying a lot is everyone has choices. Yeah. I'm choosing to tell you, what I can offer. You don't have to stay. So like, if you're clear on what you can provide, people can make the decision to stay or go, and they have to do what's best for them. So if I were to like summarize that, it's kind of like a disengagement between myself and the happiness of the people that work for me. I want to give them the right resources, tools to do their job well, but I'm not responsible for their overall life happiness, and I can't show up in a way that takes care of that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really big shift. I feel like the things that are coming to mind are like just learning how to not take things so personally, which does come with, you really do have to work on yourself and your stuff, because now you've created this thing. And just like, I don't know, like when you have a baby and you're like, isn't the baby the cutest? And other people are like, yeah, I don't really know. Not all babies are as cute as you think, but you're the mom. So you're like, this is the best. And I think that's the same with our businesses. It's very vulnerable to put something out there that you created and have other people be like, well, kind of sucks here, like, or for whether it's clients or someone in the community or your staff, like it is very vulnerable. And at the same time, like to find ways to separate yourself from, yes, I'm a business owner, this is my thing, and not everyone's going to like it, and that's totally okay for them. I think also having that mentality with just everything, like your staff. Katie and I have had conversations about like, in the beginning, that early group that's there with you, that's creating and they're getting all excited about everything, they're probably not going to be the same people who were with you, 10 years down the road. And if they are, that's great. But at the time, I remember interviewing people and being like, this is like a place where people are going to work for life. And now I like gag thinking about that. Like, ew, like who says stuff like that? But I think like the mentality for me, when you let go of, people are going to come and go, staff are going to come and go, problems are going to come and go. Then when something doesn't go the way that you were hoping, your inner world isn't being so like thrashed around.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. I always say you rent your employees, you don't own them. And that was a huge shift for me too. Like what Shaelene was saying is that not hiring people expecting they're going to be lifers at Creative Healing. This is just a part of their journey. And when we can sit back and look at, like, this is a person we want to be successful, whether it's here or someone else. But if they do a great job when they're with us and they give it their all and they contribute, that's all we can ask for.
And that is so helpful to someone sitting out there who does not have the team yet or is in that first phase of hires and maybe does have a lot of those people-pleasing tendencies or can really struggle with uncomfortable conversations and starting to lean into that. And I would totally agree that the sooner you have those conversations, the clearer you are with the expectations, the more filters you have in place, the more secure you get with what you have to offer and what you've created and what your vibe and your culture is, the easier it is to see if people are in alignment. And a lot of us need to go through a process to get there. And we might not be able to articulate that really clearly in the beginning, but it is so evident with the two of you and with the community that you've created that I'm sure that has been invaluable. Being around people that get it. I always say that in the beginning, I think I falsely assumed, even though this sounds ridiculous now, that on some level, my clinicians, especially the ones that were with me in the very beginning, and look at that, I'm even saying my clinicians, they're not mine, they work for our practice, that were with me at a certain stage and that I had poured into them and invested would understand on some level or have a degree of investment if I modeled and if I demonstrated what was really valuable to me. And man, that was something that I had to knock down. Their experiences working for other people were not the same as mine. Their reasons for joining my practice are not the same reasons that I started the practice. We all have different love languages and ways that we feel appreciated and worthy and recognized. And so it sounds like the two of you having each other and having the community has been helpful. What would you say to that?
I think that being a group practice owner, being a leader, an entrepreneur can be a really lonely place for a lot of reasons. But when you're managing the company, you're holding all the information, and not everybody has all that information. Shaelene mentioned parenting earlier. I really see owning a group practice, running a group practice, the same way that I see parenting. And I have a 17-year-old, so I'm very familiar and comfortable with somebody not liking what I'm doing or being embarrassed by what I'm doing almost all of the time. But we hold all the information. So they might see one thing in the day to day and have an opinion about it, but they don't know all the information that we hold. And so we have to make those decisions from the place of greater good, because our job is to keep this business going and sustainable, even if one thing in it isn't working the way that someone else prefers that it would. And I remember being that employee, being like, nobody's doing things a way that works or that's the right way, having like no idea about how a business works at that point.
Totally.
Yeah. And I think too, that's a really, I think like an unexpected but developmental stage of group practice owners, that bittersweet moment where you switch tracks from, oh, right, like I'm very friendly with them and I might consider some of them like some of my closest friends, but I'm always going to be their boss. And they're always going to choose themselves over me in this job. And they should, because that's what I would do. But I think that comes from that like younger, early stage, starry-eyed view where it's like, we're going to do this. And then you're like, you're going to do this because this is your business that you've created. And hopefully you'll create a place that supports that vision that you're trying to execute, that'll attract people that want to come along with you. But it's always their choice. And so until that like realization happens, I think there's a lot of suffering that comes up for group practice owners. There's a lot of resentment. There's a lot of like, I'm doing all of this for you. And how dare they ask what I'm doing? You know, like there's a lot of assumptions. And I just think that, again, like the balance of working on yourself and finding the right people, like your staff are not the people to hear how burnt out you are. That's not their burden to carry. Your staff are not the people to, you know, come up with the idea. I just want them to come up with the ideas that they're, you know, remembering that there are people who want to just come to work, do their work and leave. I think that's hard for practice owners because our brains generally are like thinking up all these different things. And you think that other people's brains work in the same way. And it's like, no, some people are just perfectly content coming in and doing just that. So I think there's a lot of mental shifts that have to happen to run a practice in a way that feels good for you, regardless of the state of how the money's looking, how many clients are coming in, turnover, all of these different things, as well as like having that kind of a culture for your practice where people actually want to be. So it's very much like the more you let go, the more you attract, like in a natural way. But if you're trying to hold on, you'll repel a lot.
I resonate with every single thing that the two of you have mentioned so far. And I'm also thinking about how when I try to find that community locally for myself, the challenge of people seeing me as competition, not responding, not being open to coming together, when I see it as just purely collaboration. We all have our own practices. There are clinicians that would be a better fit for me or a better fit for another practice. There are plenty of clients to help. So I think broadening the horizon a little bit and being able to find people that maybe can relate in terms of an insurance-based practice versus a private pay practice, or the demographic that aren't necessarily right around where you are. And then hopefully you can find those people locally. I mean, did either of you have a similar experience? Did you find anybody that you could connect with that was local, that wasn't virtual or through events?
I did have a team, like a consultation team that I was meeting with locally. We were also discussing business related things. For several reasons, after like a year of meeting, it kind of disbanded and we went our separate ways. But I don't know. Like, I think there's, pros and cons for these social media spaces, but there's a lot of opportunity to stay connected with people that are not like one Friday a month at noon when you also want to be getting a massage or getting your nails done or something not related to that. So I just think for me, the way that, my time management works and the way that I like to stay connected, I like the online space. I like the intentional time that we take to connect, like in our quarterly meetings and things like that with our Stabilize and Scale cohorts.
Mm-hmm.
But the in-person, we're connected in our Philly Private Practice Facebook group. Like we're connected there. I don't know if it's a different experience, Shaelene.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think, I mean, like when I was getting started, I just feel like the kind of person I am, like I'm going to talk to anybody. So I'm going to talk to whoever is going to talk back to me. And I've always been the person that, I don't know, I'm just always looking for opportunities and connections. So it's not hard for me to find people because I'm always just like sitting in the front and raising my hand and staying after and asking more questions. And like, that's just kind of like my energy. So I had a friend who opened up a group practice and it was the same situation where there was nobody in my area doing DBT. And so I was like, okay, well then I'm just going to do this myself. And she encouraged me and she told me about Maureen's podcast and the Profit First book and all of these things. So like she was my go-to at the time. And then I just started reaching out to other people. I mean, that's how Katie and I got more connected. I do think there was like a moment, there was a time where a practice owner reached out to me locally and I felt a little threatened because she had been here for like years and years and years. And I was like, what is she like wanted to go out for coffee. And now she's just like such a wealth of knowledge. Like she genuinely just wanted to connect. And in my mind, I'm like, is this like a competition thing or what's going on? So I think like it's hard. I know depending on where you live, it's hard. Like Katie and I are in areas that there are a lot of people and we have people in Stabilize and Scale who are in really rural areas. And so they have to depend on things like our group in order to have that support and stay connected. But I also think like you might not always find the person who's doing the thing that you want that can like be on your level and consult with you, but you can always find people. So like if I didn't have people in this space, and I had thought of it at one point, but I just don't have enough time. Like I would totally be down to set up like local business owners who have nothing to do with group practice ownership, but they run yoga studios or an electric company or things like that. So there might be a lack of group practice owners where you are, or maybe the ones that are there, unfortunately, are in a scarcity place and that's unfortunate for them, but there's always going to be business owners everywhere.
Yeah.
And you can always find ways to connect in that way. But yeah, I talk all the time, talk to people. Wow. And when I go to conferences, even like, because you and I were at the conference last week, clinical conference, and I just make a point to always sit next to people I don't know and be like, hey, where are you from? And that opens up so many doors. Like you never really, we have someone who's in Stabilize and Scale, Trish, who we love. And I met Trish in Hawaii at a conference and I was sitting down with her for the first time. She was with Jen Agee, who I was just getting to know.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, can I sit with you guys? And I sat down with them and I was like, oh, let me buy this round of drinks. And we sat and we chatted. And it's just so funny. Like Jen Agee, now we're in each other's mastermind group. She holds retreats all over the world. I get to work at them. And Trish has been a member of Stabilize and Scale. She's come to all of our events. She sent her team to my training. Like to me in my mind, I'm like, oh, these things all started at a small table having drinks. And like, Katie and I and this big idea, like this started over lunch. And we were like, will anybody buy this? Like, will anyone show up to this? Does anybody need this? And it started from like a 6-page workbook to like a 150-page workbook that we spent all day editing yesterday. So I just think it's like, you never know what's going to come from connecting, but it can't happen. Whatever it is that's going to come, you can't find that if you don't put yourself out there. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't really matter who's there. Just talk to them.
Yeah, that ripple effect is so helpful and incredibly inspiring. And there are endless opportunities. The virtual space, conferences, in person, locally, nationally, even internationally. So you had mentioned know your numbers. I use that phrase often myself. You had started by referencing the number of sessions that a clinician needs to see to be profitable. And then I'm sure it just continues from there with what you're going to pay, a sustainable compensation model. But how deep do you both go with numbers? Because I know ultimately you want every clinician to have multiple numbers that they're responsible for. So share more about that.
So at the top, we like to say that everybody has at least one number. I'm not going to overload someone with a lot of numbers. So for our therapist, the main number that I'm looking at is their session count number, because that's tied to revenue and that's tied to the overall goal and the budget. But then if they're not hitting that number, we're dialing into other numbers. So we're looking at their cancellation rate. Is this impacting, what's showing up in their direct hours number? We're looking at retention rate. I'm also looking at things that are not numbers and more of a yes or no, but are your treatment plans and your notes done on time? Because let's say you have 30 client sessions, which is 10 more than the expectation, but you have 0 notes done. Well, the quality of your care isn't good. And that's really important to me. Yes. Everyone in my business has a number. Our intake coordinator has a number, which is her conversion rate. And so everyone knowing what they need in order to win in their job is part of that clarity of here's how I show up. Here's how I do my job well. If I'm doing this, nobody's going to be micromanaging me. I'm not going to have to hear from anybody. So for me, knowing your number and everybody knowing their number it's nervous system regulation. It's a way that we're able to do what we need to do and know that we're on track.
I think of when we were talking about like, what are the things we would have done differently? I still see this on Facebook a lot where people are asking, what should I pay my clinicians? 50-50, 60-40, the whole thing. And I just think like, that's not the way, because I don't know what your average session rate is. I don't know what benefits you offer. I don't know what your total compensation percentage is. And so without knowing that, like that number and the feedback that you're getting is kind of irrelevant, and it can really set you up for a lot of problems if I'm basing it on, Katie does a 50-50 split. But she's insurance based and her average session rate is lower. There's all of these different things. And so having everyone know, okay, if you're full-time, you have a full-time agreement and this is how many sessions that requires, that's all tied to the numbers that I have to manage, like overall practice revenue, cost, all of these other things. And so when I make decisions to add benefits, change benefits, I want my team to get trained in something. I want to increase the percentage of health insurance. I want to make their PTO better. All of that comes from numbers. And so if I'm not fitting that in a certain percentage, then we're not going to be in a good situation. And I remember talking about this in one of our live meetups with Stabilize and Scale. I think so many times, when we don't do our own work, when we don't have accountability in place, when we are not primed up as leaders, when we don't have someone else in our space holding us accountable, we end up managing with our feelings because we take things personally and we want our employees to like us and we don't want to make anyone feel weird or uncomfortable. And we don't want to sound corporate, so we don't want to talk about numbers. But at the end of the day, if I can't pay their paycheck or I have to cut their insurance off because not enough money come in, they're not really going to give a shit about the fact that they felt better in that one conversation. You know what I mean? So it's like, they're not, your staff doesn't want a therapist to make them feel better. They want a leader. And they might not know that all of the time when you're telling them actually, no, I can't give you a raise because that's not how it works. That's not how our payment structure goes. They might not get that in the moment, but ultimately the bills need to get paid. They come to work, they need a paycheck, all of that. So I just think the number that comes up that we're watching is ultimately all funneled to this bigger picture of this is what it means to work here.
Absolutely.
I think that knowing that top-down number, I don't make any decision without that at this point. I think 2 years ago, I had 3 locations and I decided to dial it back to 2 locations because I wasn't enjoying being a group practice owner anymore. I had almost 25 clinicians. It was in a different area than my other locations. It was just a whole different set of expectations, a different age bracket of clinicians that had different ideas about what it meant to work somewhere. And so when I started looking at the numbers and I started understanding this is the revenue coming in, however, if I dial it back to these two locations, my profit margin stays the same. And what I'm bringing home stays the same, but my stress level and my enjoyment about what I'm doing gets way better. That was a win for me. And so it was, I could have asked Shaelene, my husband, should I do this? Should I open? Should I close? I could have asked my employees. But what it came down to for me was knowing my numbers, knowing that it was a strategic decision, and knowing that I'd feel better and enjoy my life more if I did that, which I think is also something that should be on my scorecard, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think there's so much self-sacrificing that happens again because you're taking it personally or you feel like it's your responsibility to manage everyone's life and problems. But like even just thinking back, because I remember when you were talking about closing that building, like thinking about, yeah, like if Katie was in the play in one of those earlier stages, she might have asked her employees, like, well, what do you guys think? Well, I really like working here and it's really close to my house. And it's like, right, but they're gonna choose what's important to them. And that's great. They should. But that's why they need someone who's going to make smart decisions about the business. I remember when I first found the space that I'm in, I sat in the office, like waiting for them to get paperwork or whatever. And I was sitting there map questing my staff's distance from their house to the office. And I was like, oh, I don't know. This is like 20 minutes. I wonder if that's going to be too far for them. And I just looked back like, oh, girl, like instead of being like, is this a good place for me to root my entire life? I'm like checking how far they are. And it just, I think that stuff just comes up in so many places. But the great thing about data is like, it's clear and there aren't feelings attached. It's like 1 + 1 has to equal 2. And if we all know that, then we can all figure out like, all right, what needs to get us back on track, or how can I help you to get there? Or, maybe this just ultimately isn't a good fit. The data doesn't make stories up. There's no like emotion in that. It's just, this is what it is.
Yep, totally. So we have reverse engineered this final question that I have, and I think you've illuminated a lot of points. But what are the most common mistakes that you're seeing those in group practice making when they maybe aren't really strategic and planful in the beginning, or they have the best of intentions, but before they know it, they have grown maybe larger than anticipated, and they're questioning their decision? Is there anything that we haven't touched upon?
Shaelene hit on a really big one, which is asking other practice owners, well, how do you do it? Mm-hmm. Like everyone asking me, well, how do you do your salaries and bonus structure? Well, you don't know what my session price is, things like that. So, So asking other people, what's your exact strategy and not tailoring it to their business. That's a big one that we see a lot. And then I think indecisiveness, and maybe this is like the space between idea and action for me is so thin, like there might not even be one. And that's a lot of why I've gotten to where I am today. But I've seen group practice owners struggle with, should I grow bigger? Should I get smaller? Should I close down? And they stay in this place of uncertainty and indecision for so long, probably for fear of disappointing other people or the shame that comes with that or a million other reasons. But I just think if we can like choose and move on, we'll deal with whatever those consequences are, but at least we're moving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say I saw an ad recently for an accounting firm, and their ad really resonated with me. It's like cheap is expensive. And I made a lot of those mistakes. I think, just trying to save money because I wasn't secure on my numbers and my money picture and what that all meant together. There was still so much that I was just winging it and figuring out along as I went. And it ends up costing so much money in the long run. Like when you don't hire the right person, it costs so much money in the long run. When you don't trust your decisions to fire someone, you spend so much money in the long run. When you don't invest in, even like quality coaching. For Katie and I, like we recognize stabilize and scale. It's a big investment, but the return on investment that people get from joining stabilize and scale. Like people are coming in this phase of, I don't know what my next move is, or I'm in the day-to-day all the time, or I feel like I'm over this and I'm going to either like sell this thing or I have to find another way out. And they go through stabilize and scale. And then it's really cool to see them after the program in a year. Now they're working on something completely different. Katie's doing a teen conference. I decided to run a conference in Disney World next year. And it's like, we can do those things because everything's good and taken care of. And it doesn't look like that anymore. So our members are writing books and they're holding retreats and they're doing all of these real cool things. And all of that comes from having an investment in something that's really going to give you the tools that you need. And I just think, it's hard for a lot of different reasons, but it's also, I just think it's something that people have to take seriously. Like whatever this investment is going to be, I want to make sure that I'm going to get a good return on it, as opposed to spending years trying to save on the cost of something. I don't want to go all in on this website, or I don't want to go all in with this program, or whatever the thing is. But then ultimately, like 6 years go by and they've lost money because of, not making the right decisions that they've needed, or they need to close a location because they didn't have the data to think it through. Like all of these different things just ends up costing so much money in the long run. And I think having that in your mind at the beginning is really helpful.
Absolutely. So for those that are intrigued, aren't familiar with the program, can you give them an idea of what they can expect in Stabilize and Scale, where they can go for more information and how they can sign up?
Yeah, the website is grouppracticescale.com, and it's a business immersion experience is what we call it. And what it looks like is 3 co-working days in the online space where you're learning, but not just learning, you're coming together and you're actually doing the work and implementation. One thing that we found is a lot of times with courses, you learn things, but then you never actually, as the busy group practice owner, have time to put them into action. So we have them carved out quarterly. The final quarterly is a 2-day destination retreat where we work on your systems together. We bring everything together that you've learned throughout the year in these quarters online, make sure that you have an understanding, you've implemented, we're troubleshooting any barriers that have come up along the way. And so you really leave at the end of this 9 months year program having your dashboard, knowing all of your numbers, having your systems documented and followed by everyone. Your vision is rolled out to your entire company. You've managed some of that, maybe pushback or turnover with the support of your cohort. And it's like group practice in a box, but with like a team of support that's rallying with you along the way. One of my favorite visuals of someone that came through Stabilize and Scale, she came in with a shoebox full of all of her receipts for like the past 5 years of group practice, not knowing what she was paying, what she could afford, what people were doing. And by the end of Stabilize and Scale, she knew all of those things. It was a lot to go over. She bought a building. She, I believe, is opening an IOP or has already done so, is writing a book. And so it's, we take the messy and we make it magic. And I think that's the beauty of Stabilize and Scale.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Well said. Shaelene, any final thoughts that you want to add?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think the other thing about Stabilize and Scale is like it's always evolving. So our version 1 versus version now is very different. But the people who are in version 1 and everybody who joins Stabilize and Scale is in there for life. So, as people are coming in and they're getting their curriculum alongside their cohort this year, people from, the original group or the groups in between drop in to kind of like see what's new, what's been added, and to just come at things from a different perspective. Okay, now my systems are in place. I'm not in the day-to-day. I'm going to go back in and see like what my next move might be, or, how am I going to digest this information now, having a different set of problems, or like much less problems than I did before. So yeah, it's this ever evolving thing. And I would say it's reciprocal. We learned so much from the practice owners that we have in our group. And based on their feedback, based on things that they're doing, we continue to add, update, refine. So that way, we're evolving with like the times. And I'll just say, I think that's one other thing, like younger practice owner self is just remember like things are going to change. So whatever you did that was working then is probably not going to work next year, and you're going to have to be willing to pivot. And so I think Stabilize and Scale and the folks in there do a really good job at, all right, here's the problem. How are we going to apply what we've learned to this and figure out what's next?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for creating such a comprehensive program, for the events that you put together, and for your collaboration with one another and everything you shared today. I really appreciate it. This is one of those to definitely go back and re-listen. I can see people feverishly taking notes. I always like highlight key points. There's going to be many.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you.
If you like what you're hearing, please rate and review. This will help others find us and benefit as well. The Compassionate Climb podcast represents the opinions of Julia Napini and her guests. The information provided is intended for educational purposes only and should not be taken as legal advice. If that is what you are seeking, please consult an attorney.